Hi, this is Aaron from Workflow 86, and today we'll be talking about our merge workflow component. So, your merge workflow component allows you to merge multiple workflow paths or branches into a single step and then continue the workflow once those steps have been merged together. So, as an example, some context on where this might be used, let's take, for example, this particular workflow here. So in this workflow, we have a form, which then triggers three tasks. So we've got a form A, a form B, and then a form C. Now, if these three workflows were connected into the conditional logic like this, what would happen is that this conditional logic module would not run unless form A and form B and form C have been executed. And this is the default behavior in Workflow 86 when you actually connect one component to another. So this component has three dependencies, and unless those three dependencies all come in, it will not run. Now, let's say instead of triggering these two steps when all three have come in, we actually want to trigger these two steps when either Form A is submitted, or Form B is submitted, or Form C is submitted. Now, the way you would achieve that without the merge workflow component is you would actually duplicate this step three times. So you'll have, this here, you'll have the same steps here, and you have the same steps here. And that way, again, if, once the form is run, these three tasks get triggered. And if you complete any one of those tasks, it will actually trigger one of these events. Now, instead of doing that, what we can actually do is to use the merge workflow component. So if we place the merge workflow component in there, connect these into the merge workflow component, what we can then configure is if Form A or Form B or Form C are completed, to then continue the workflow into the next step. So this in turn modifies, like I mentioned earlier, that default behavior that requires all three connections or all three input components to be executed before the next step is completed. So if we go into the merge workflow component, you can see that you can actually configure that inside of here. So let me just reset this. So let's say that the setting we want is to run the workflow if Form A or Form B or Form C. So the selection we'll do is merge and continue the workflow when any of the following input components are run. So what this will basically do is create a OR condition. So Form A or Form B or Form C. And so this workflow will merge and continue when Form A or Form B or Form C comes into this particular merge workflow component. And so again, when the form is submitted, these three tasks will be created, and as soon as one task is executed, the workflow will continue. And the way that this particular setting works is it works on a first come, first serve basis. So if Form A is the one that's submitted first, then that's the one that will get merged in and then continue the workflow. If Form B is the first one that comes in, then that will get merged in to continue the workflow. And similarly for Form C. Now, one thing you can actually also do inside the merge workflow component is actually set a combination of components that will be merged together in order for it to run. So say, for example, I actually want it to run in two scenarios. So I want it to run if Form A and Form B are submitted together. So I need those two as a combo, or if just Form C is submitted. So this allows you to sort of configure different combinations of inputs that will then be merged together in order to continue the workflow. So again, Form A and Form B or Form C. So if we go back to the workflow again, this means that if Form A and Form B are submitted, as in both of them are submitted, then the merge workflow will continue on the rest of the workflow. Or if only Form C is submitted, then it will also continue as well. Now, the merge workflow component is useful in this context because, like we mentioned before, it eliminates the need to sort of duplicate components or paths in multiple paths in order to achieve the same effect. The other way that the merge workflow is also really useful is it allows you to set up a scenario where you have multiple triggers, like in this particular case. So in this case, we have three possible triggers for this workflow. This workflow can be started from a form, it can be started from a schedule start component, or it can be started from a webhook component. And again, what this means is that it allows us multiple ways in which we can set off this particular workflow. So when a form is submitted, this workflow can run. When the scheduled start time is reached, it will run. And when a webhook import is, when a webhook sort of payload comes in, that will also trigger the workflow as well. And again, similarly, like we mentioned before here, we can also set this to work on a particular combination. So it might be, for example, trigger this workflow when the form and the schedule start are executed, or when the form and the webhook import component are executed, or maybe when all three or any combination of those are executed into it. That is the merge workflow component. You might be familiar with it in other sort of platforms. They often refer to it as a converger component. But again, it essentially allows you to change the behavior, the default behavior of how workflows are run in Workflow 86. It opens up the ability to eliminate duplication or the need to duplicate steps inside of your workflow, but it also allows you to create workflows with multiple triggers as well.